So then moving on to kind of going off that
grief,
or grief and lack of closure. The movie I recommended, Jackie, was a documentary that I love. It's in my top 10 movies of all time, I'd say. Dear Zachary. The full title is Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father, but the short way you can say it is just Dear Zachary. So I guess I'll summarize it quickly. It's kind of a Three Billboards-esque situation where a terrible thing happens and there's a lack of justice, and it's about people fighting for justice to tragic results, and it's true. It's a documentary. It actually happened, and I think it's just such a powerful movie. Without spoiling it too much. The gist of it is we have the filmmaker, Kurt, had a childhood friend who was murdered in cold blood by an ex-girlfriend of his. And then we find out later on in the story that the ex-girlfriend is pregnant with the man she murdered's child. So now the story becomes about his grandparents trying to fight for the rights of this child and trying to bring justice to the woman who killed their son. And it's such a fascinating story about human endeavor and the lengths that we'll go to protect people we love, and like I said, grief and lack of closure. So what did you think about this movie?
So I watched this last night and I cried like a baby. I cried several times. I hadn't heard of it before, so I had no idea what I was getting into. And so everything was so fresh. And when I first started watching it, because it's filmed in the early 2000s, it has sort of like that like MySpace TV, like it's not like HD, it's not great quality, you know? So I was like, like I wonder what this is about. And that just kind of shows that you don't need a lot of money to make a great film. You know, you really just need a good story. And this story was heart-wrenching. It really shows you the grandparents, I think, are some of the most like resilient people in the world. It shows you resilience. And again, it goes along with the theme of injustice and trying to get justice even when like nothing is working for you. Like it's and how hard it is to get that justice, and how cruel some people can be in the world, but you just keep living and you just keep trying to put good into the world, even if so much has been taken from you.
Right.
So
sorry, go ahead.
No, you continue.
Yeah, I was going to say, touching on what you said about, I should say, if you haven't watched this movie yet and you're planning on it, you're definitely going to cry. I guarantee you, at least once. I kind of pride myself on the fact that, like, I'll get emotional at a movie, but I don't. It takes a lot for me to cry. I was crying within the first 10 minutes.
I'm the same way, where I don't really cry at movies. I'm more willing to cry at television than movies. I don't know why, but it took me about like halfway through the film to start crying. And then once the floodgates were open, it was like every few minutes, like I was like crying.
Right. Yeah. It gets very, very, I mean, it starts off very intense, and that's another thing I want to talk about. Like the guy who shot this and directed it, he also he carried a lot of hats in the movie. He shot it, directed it, he edited it, he did the score, I think, at some points.
Oh, wow.
He did a fantastic job. One of the best edited movies I think I've ever seen. The way everything is so, he knows when to like dwell on something and like and sit in like the tone of what he's created through what he's showed you, but he also everything. There's moments in the movie that are like so quick and so impactful that it's really interesting. I can't think of another instance that I've seen that in a documentary. I think documentaries really kind of take their time, and this one was just very like balls to the wall, like information, and doesn't really let you process it. It can kind of like making you identify almost with the people in it, because it's like they constantly are having all these horrible things unloaded onto them, and it's just like like we keep on saying, it's an instance where you just kind of have to deal with it and then think, okay, what's the next step? But like the first few minutes, especially, like when you have all these people talking like, oh man, this guy was great, I loved him, he had all these great, and then like the people like start like that first minute or two is, I think, a perfect summation of that, because it's very quick, like, oh, he was a great guy, we loved him a lot, and then they start to cry, and then we start to like watch these like drawn out clips of people being emotional, and it's so intense.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to bring up to you is that was the editing. Was one thing I liked that he did. Since I'm not an editor, I don't really pay attention as much to editing as I should. But the one thing I really liked is the quote unquote villains in the story. He does this thing editing wise where it's like a still picture of them, and he like moves the mouth, so like almost like mocking them. Like it's just a still picture of them, but just like the mouth moves like it's a cartoon. And it's just this very subtle way of like mocking these very evil people. And I really, really enjoyed it, that it was just a very, very subtle way of being like, these are like cartoonish, like evil. These people should be like, he's just like slightly mocking them. And I think that was a really smart move editing wise to not give them that, that
the
human,
same sort of,
that like
right.
human, yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
No, yeah, he doesn't let them kind of sit up on this like pedestal that they've kind of put themselves on, because a lot of the people in power in this movie are kind of the reprehensible ones, like the people who are kind of they're slow to take action, and they don't see the urgency of this terrible situation until it's too late. And it just like talk about like also that I said like you'll definitely cry. This movie's also going to really make you mad.
Yeah.
You know, like in so many different points, like you said, with those scenes where it's like the talking, like the little still pictured talking heads, it kind of mocks them, but it frustrates you. And then by the end of it, when the ultimate tragedy happens, it kind of is like the comedic aspect, or not like the comedic, but like a little bit lighthearted aspect fades away, and you're just left with like this overwhelming sense of just like frustration and anger, and it's so it's so masterfully done. So I guess we can get into a little bit of spoilers. Yeah. So if you haven't seen Dear Zachary, go out and buy a box of Kleenex before you do, and have like a stress toy to play with as well, so you don't kill somebody.
Have a dog with you or something. Right,
something that you can cry on and just be emotional with. But yeah, so what was for me, like I said, I was crying almost immediately when when you first hear the grandparents talking about how they found out their son died. Like that had me in tears immediately. But what was the moment for you where you like where all of it just kind of hit you and you fell apart?
Yeah, I wasn't sad at first because the film is called Dear Zachary, and they show clips of the little boy. And so I thought, well, they're going to talk about this awful tragedy that his dad is murdered, and they're going to talk about the injustice of how this woman is not put away. But I thought that the ending would be like, but you're still here. Like, you're still here, and yours was left to your dad. And so there's a happy ending, there's a happy twist. Like, through tragedy, there's life. Through tragedy, there's goodness. And then, spoiler, the mother kills the 13-month-old, her 13-month-old child, and then kills herself. And that was the moment where I was like, I just wasn't expecting it. I thought I knew what the tone of this documentary was. I thought the ending was going to be, but look at this bright, bushy-eyed child, and it just... It took a huge turn, and that's when I the floodgates opened. It didn't stop because, I mean, it's a 13-month-old child.
Yeah.
They did nothing wrong in this world. And a child brought so much happiness to the grandparents who saw their lost son in the eyes of their grandchild, and to have their son be taken away from them by this woman, and then... Almost twice. Yeah, and then feel this... see their son's eyes in their grandchild and love this child unconditionally, and to lose that again, it's just, they're just the most resilient people. And continue. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. That's one other thing that I love about that movie is because it is so personal. It's not a scenario where you have like, and not to say that this is bad, but it's not a case where you have like a Werner Herzog or a someone who is like not involved in the situation stepping in to bring light to it. Like everyone in this story is is a tight knit group of people.
Rooted, yeah.
Yeah, it's the like I said, the filmmaker who put all this together was like the friend since second grade guy of the dad who gets murdered, and he says in the beginning, he's like, this started off as like my way of giving myself closure and making one last movie with my friend, and then like you said, it turns into like the, hey, you're never going to know your dad, but this is a way where you can kind of see what he was like and hear about how your grandparents fought for you. And then when that all falls apart, it's like, here's a nice like capsule of like showing, hey, I think their names are Kate and David, is like, hey, there's still people out there that care about you, and look how strong you are, and look how much you've endured, and you're still here. I think it's arguably the most personal movie I think I've ever seen, and it does such a great job of bringing you into that that circle. It doesn't really feel like we're outsiders watching all this happen. Whenever they're not talking about the case or they're not talking about the chain of events, we're like learning about the grandparents, we're learning about the guy that got murdered, we're hearing firsthand account from like friends and family members, and it makes you feel like you're part of this whole group of people.
Yeah, which I think it's so hard to watch without crying, because you do feel like you know this guy, you know this doctor, you know this like you get so invested. It makes you feel like you're one of the family, like you're one of the friends, and then when these tonal shift happens, where the concept of the movie sort of changes as the filmmaker lives through this, it's very heart-wrenching. You really, really feel it. You feel all the emotional catharsis, you know?
Mm-hmm. And like we said with Three Billboards, it doesn't really resolve it. Like, I mean, it does kind of resolve itself, but it doesn't give you it kind of inherent with the fact that the woman that they pretty much know killed their child is not going to be brought to justice, is not going to there is no closure for them, and there's like, I mean, like, you can move on from the situation. I don't even know how you would be able to, but like you would in time eventually move on, but there's not really an ending. It's just kind of
you don't get the justice. Yeah.
Right, there's no justice, but in a very different way than Three Billboards. I think with Three Billboards, the door's kind of left open, where it's like, oh, well, we personally
they could
don't
find
have
the
justice,
rapist,
but we could have some sort of solution here. But there's and actually, now that I think about it, I should have sent you. There is a 15-minute follow-up to the story made a year or two after the movie came out. I'll send you the link. This particular follow-up is free on YouTube, but if you for anyone watching who wants to see Dear Zachary,
I watched it on YouTube, and it worked fine.
Yeah, so it's on YouTube, on Amazon. Actually, no, yeah, it's free on Amazon Prime too. Huh, I didn't realize that. You could rent it on iTunes and Google Play. Any way you can watch it, definitely check it out. But there's point being, anyway, there's like a 15-minute follow-up on YouTube, which I should have sent you before we recorded, but I definitely recommend checking that out, where it does kind of give you somewhat closure to the story. It talks about the release of the movie and the attempts by Kate and David to change get the legislative change, and it's like a more condensed version of the movie, and a lot of the good things that I love about that movie are in that little short 10 or 20 minutes. And it just talks about like the struggle of them getting that legislative change and having some small victory in the situation, and it just as touching, just as powerful, just as moving as the whole documentary. But it's such a moving and powerful experience.
It's such a personal film. Because the filmmaker, like he said, he didn't even know, like, like the movie was about one thing and then it became about another thing. And that's something that I don't think I could ever do as a filmmaker, because I like schedules. I like knowing what's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the end, what's the storyline. And this one, the filmmaker didn't know. He was just following the story. And
right. It's something he says constantly. He says, I had no clue. What does he say? He's like, I had no clue what I was doing, and I had no clue when or if I would ever be done.
Yeah,
but
how long it would take, years or months. Yeah, he has no idea. It's that's what makes it just so personal. Is you're just going on this journey with Kurt, the documentarian, and it's just so personal.
It's an amazing movie, and if you like a good. The one other thing I mentioned this with my fiance too, because one thing that we enjoy watching is we like a lot of crime, like true crime documentaries and like sort of ID Discovery Go type.
Oh yeah,
like,
I love it. I love binge watching that shit.
Right. Yeah. It's I think that those kind of shows are so embedded in our culture. Like it's just kind of everyone, whether they admit to it or not, enjoys watching it. And the one thing she had said was, when you get down to it, this basically is like, it could be an episode of like Snapped, or it could be like one of those like little abridged hour-long things where it talks about this horrible tragedy. But like you said, I think what sets it apart so much is that it's not focused on look how messed up this woman was and how she was able to get away with everything she did. It really focuses on look at this amazing life, these two amazing lives that were taken away from us, and let's really dwell in the sadness. And that's kind of like another one of the big messages that the film communicates, is that whether you think about it or not, there are so many people that you touch with your life and your experiences that you'll never even understand. Like the sheer enormity of like the friends and the family and like the acquaintances and the neighbors that come out of the woodwork to talk about how amazing the Andrew, the guy who gets murdered, how amazing he was and how much they love his parents. Like it really puts things into perspective for you. And I think it's a really, it's just I keep on saying it. It's just a powerful, powerful experience that I think everyone should go through. I mean, it's like we keep on saying, it's a tough sit, and you will cry and you will get very mad. But I think in a weird way, I don't know if it was the same for you, but every single time I watch it, I finish feeling this sense of happiness and this sense of like, I don't know, like this sense of like, no matter what's going on in my life, I look at all these people that were touched by this guy, and how many people have I touched with my life and my experiences and knowing me. Like it's very in a selfish sort of way. It's very fulfilling. I don't know if you got the same kind of gist of it, but
I get what you're saying. I think my reaction was a little different. I get what you're saying, where at the end they talk about like the parents' lives and how much they love them, and how great the life of Andrew was. And I got that. I felt this enormous sense of love for the family. I felt this enormous sense, and the ending was, I felt like change needed to be made, which I think is sort of I think what he wanted to show was like, you can help change legislative. Like I after I watched it, I felt like I want to help, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I think I felt a little different, where I got a little angry that the legislative, the laws were the way that they are, and that this woman was left with really no consequences, and that, I mean, there was some consequences for the psychiatrist and for the woman in the Child Protective Services, but not enough. Like, not...
Nowhere near enough.
No.
It would never be enough.
There's never, unless the murder was behind bars, it's not enough justice. And even then, I mean, how do you live?
Exactly.
So
the one small consolation that you could have is taken away from you.
Yeah, it made me, the ending made me feel a lot of love for the family, and angry that that the laws are this way, and it made me it makes me want to change and enact that change so that it's easier to get justice for awful things that are happening like this.
I think that in a way that, like, I guess getting to like the heart of it, the ending, or not even just the ending, but the movie and the whole, is a very self-reflective experience, regardless of whether you look at it as like seeing yourself in that situation and thinking, man, how many people have I touched with my life, or how would I react if this is something that happened to my close friend, or like you said, it's very like, man, I really want to get out and make a difference. I want to make sure that nothing like this happens again. It's a very like,
it's personal. It's personal.
It's a very self-reflective and personal experience. And yeah, everyone should see it. I recommend. This is one of the movies that I recommend to almost anybody, whether you like documentaries or you like emotional movies. I think that everyone should at least see this movie once, because it's so moving, and you can get a lot of things out of it. And even if somehow by the end of it you don't have a moment of self-reflection and have any one of these thoughts we've discussed, it at the very heart of it, it's a powerful and moving story that I think should be talked about, and people should definitely see it.